The lights of Outpost 7 flickered in the endless darkness of space. The station sat at the edge of human territory, a metal island floating where two great civilizations met and watched each other with careful eyes. Daniel Cole stood at the observation window and looked out at the stars. He was a sergeant in the United Earth Defense Corps, a man of 34 years with tired eyes and steady hands. He had been a farmer once, back on Earth, before the corporations took his family's land and left him with nothing but memories of green fields and open skis. Now he stood in a cold metal room, sharing his watch duty with an alien who barely acknowledged his existence. Rand sat at the monitoring console, her four arms moving across the controls with practiced ease. She was Erin, a warrior of the blue-skinned people who had nearly gone to war with humanity 3 decades ago. Her silver-white hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her dark eyes reflected the light of the screens before her. She was tall, almost 7 feet, and she carried herself with the pride of someone who had never known defeat. The Aura did not think highly of humans. They saw them as small, weak creatures who made up for their physical failures with tricks and loud weapons, had made her feelings clear from the first day of their shared assignment. She spoke to Daniel only when duty required it, and even then her words were short and cold. Daniel did not take it personally. He had learned long ago that respect was earned, not given. He simply did his job and waited for the long night cycle to end. The hours passed slowly. Daniel checked the sensor readings and found nothing unusual. The space around the station was quiet, as it had been for months. The treaty between humans and Aura held firm, and both sides seemed content to watch and wait rather than fight. Then the alarm sounded. The noise cut through the silence like a blade. Red lights flashed across the room, and Daniel was on his feet before he fully understood what was happening. Rose from her console, her 4 hands reaching for weapons that were not there. They were in an observation module, not a combat zone. Neither of them was armed for battle. Daniel reached the main console and pulled up the sensor data. What he saw made no sense. There was something approaching from deep space, something that the computers could not identify. It was not a ship. It was not an asteroid. It was something else entirely, a tear in the fabric of space itself that grew larger with each passing second. Captain Laura Vance's voice came through the communication system. She was the station commander, a woman who had served in 3 wars and feared nothing that flew through normal space. But even her voice carried an edge of concern as she spoke. All personnel to high alert. We have an unidentified anomaly approaching from Sector 7. This is not a drill. Moved to stand beside Daniel, her earlier coldness forgotten in the face of this new threat. She studied the readings with narrowed eyes. Daniel saw her expression change from confusion to recognition, and then to something that looked very much like fear. She said the word was barely a whisper. Daniel had heard the term before, in old stories and legends. There was said to be a tier between dimensions, a doorway through which things from beyond normal space could enter the universe. He had always thought it was nothing more than a myth, a scary story told to frighten young soldiers on their first deep space assignment. The look on his face told him it was very real. The rift opened like a wound in the stars. Light poured out of it, but it was wrong somehow, a light that seemed to make the darkness around it deeper rather than pushing it away. And from that light came shapes, shadows that moved with terrible purpose toward the station. The attack began without warning. The outer sections of the station went dark as the void creatures tore through metal and glass like paper. Daniel heard screaming through the communication system, voices calling for help that would never come. The creatures were everywhere at once, flowing through corridors and vents like water through cracks in a dam. An explosion rocked the observation module. Daniel was thrown against the wall, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that the door to the main station was gone, replaced by twisted metal and sparking wires. They were cut off, trapped in a small room at the edge of a station that was dying around them. pulled herself up from the floor. Blue blood ran from a cut on her forehead, but she ignored it. She looked at the ruined doorway and then at Daniel, and for the first time since they had met, there was no contempt in her eyes. There was only the understanding that they were both going to die unless they found a way out together. The lights flickered again, and in the moment of darkness, Daniel saw them. Void creatures, pressing against the emergency seal that had closed over the ruined door. They were shadows given form, beings that seemed to drink in the light around them. Cold spread through the room as they pushed against the barrier, testing its strength. Daniel looked around the module for anything that might serve as a weapon. He found a maintenance tool, a heavy metal bar used for adjusting external sensors. It was not much, but it was something. Found a piece of broken console and held it in two of her hands, her other two raised in a fighting stance that her people had used for thousands of years. The seal began to crack. Daniel moved to stand beside, his shoulder nearly touching her arm. He could feel the cold growing stronger, could see his breath forming clouds in the air before him. The creatures beyond the seal made no sound, but he could feel their hunger, their need to consume everything that lived and breathed. "How long will the seal hold?" asked. "Not long," Daniel replied. "Then we fight." Daniel nodded. He had faced death before, on battlefields and in the cold emptiness between stars. He had always thought he would die alone, far from anyone who cared whether he lived or fell. But now, standing beside an alien warrior who had spent weeks looking at him with barely hidden disgust, he found that he was not afraid. He was simply ready. The seal broke, and the darkness poured in. The darkness came alive with movement and cold. Daniel swung his metal bar at the first shape that rushed toward him, and he felt it connect with something solid yet wrong, like striking frozen smoke. The creature recoiled but did not fall. It simply flowed around his weapon and reached for him with arms made of shadow. Moved faster than any human could. Her four arms became a blur of motion as she struck at the creatures from multiple angles at once. Her broken piece of console cut through the dark shapes, scattering them for moments before they reformed and attacked again. They fought together without words, each covering the other as they backed toward the far end of the module. The observation window was behind them now, thick glass that showed nothing but stars and the terrible light of the rift. There was nowhere left to run. A creature slipped past Daniel's guard and raked across his arm. The cold of its touch burned like fire, and he gasped in pain. Before he could recover, another creature lunged toward him from the side. He saw it coming but knew he could not move fast enough to stop it. Stepped between them. She took the blow that was meant for Daniel, the shadow claws tearing across her shoulder and chest. Blue blood sprayed across the floor as she fell to one knee, but even wounded she did not stop fighting. She drove her improvised weapon into the creature's core, and it dissolved into wisps of darkness that faded into nothing. Daniel grabbed her arm and pulled her back toward the window. The creatures hesitated, gathering themselves for another attack. He had only seconds to think. "The emergency shelter," he said, pointing to a small hatch in the floor. They would never reach the main door, but every observation module had a secondary escape route, a tiny compartment designed to keep crew alive long enough for rescue. Daniel pulled the hatch open and pushed inside before dropping in after her. He sealed the hatch just as the creatures reached it. He could hear them scratching at the metal above, feel the cold seeping through the walls around them. But the shelter held. For now, they were safe. The compartment was barely large enough for both of them. Daniel sat with his back against one wall while slumped against the other, her hand pressed against her wounded shoulder. The blue blood flowed steadily between her fingers. Daniel reached for the emergency medical kit stored beneath the bench. He pulled out bandages and antiseptic and moved toward. She pulled back, her eyes hard with suspicion. "I do not need your help," she said. "You are bleeding badly," Daniel replied. "If we do not stop it, you will pass out. Then we both die." Stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly, she lowered her hand and let him see the wound. It was deep, cutting through muscle and scraping against bone. Daniel worked quickly, cleaning the wound and applying pressure bandages. He was no doctor, but every soldier learned basic field medicine. He had patched up worse wounds than this during his years of service. "Why do you help me?" asked. Her voice was quieter now, weakened by blood loss. "We are not allies. We are not friends. Your people and mine have been enemies since the day we first met." Daniel finished securing the bandage before he answered. "On Earth," he said, "soldiers take care of each other. It does not matter what flag you serve under or what world you come from. When you fight beside someone, you look out for them. That is just how we do things." Said nothing, but something changed in her expression. The hard suspicion faded, replaced by something that might have been confusion or perhaps the beginning of understanding. Daniel found the emergency rations stored in the kit and opened a pack. He split it in half and offered one portion to. She hesitated again, but this time only for a moment before accepting the food. They ate in silence while the creatures continued to scratch at the hatch above them. The communication unit in the shelter crackled to life. Captain Vance's voice came through, broken by static but still clear enough to understand. "All survivors, report to the central hub. Evacuation ships are standing by, but the hangar is overrun. We need everyone who can still fight to help clear a path. Repeat, all survivors to the central hub." Daniel and looked at each other. The central hub was on the other side of the station, past corridors that were certainly filled with void creatures. Getting there would be almost impossible. "There may be a way," Daniel said slowly. "The maintenance tunnels run beneath the main corridors. They connect to the engineering section. If we can reach engineering, we might be able to overload the reactor and create an electromagnetic pulse. It could disrupt the creatures long enough for everyone to escape." Considered this. "And what happens to us when the reactor overloads?" Daniel did not answer. He did not need to. They both understood what he was suggesting. The silence stretched between them, then straightened, pushing herself up despite her wound. She met Daniel's eyes with a gaze that held neither fear nor contempt, only a warrior's acceptance of what must be done. "In my culture," she said, "there is no greater honor than dying beside an enemy while fighting a greater foe. It proves that both warriors were worthy of respect." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was almost soft. "I will go with you, Daniel Cole, not as your ally, not as your friend, but as a warrior who has seen your courage and found it worthy." Daniel nodded. He opened the secondary hatch that led to the maintenance tunnels below. Cold air rushed up from the darkness, but it was ordinary cold, not the terrible chill of the void creatures. The tunnels were still safe, at least for now. He went first, dropping down into the narrow passage. Followed, moving carefully to protect her injured shoulder. Above them, the scratching sounds faded as the creatures lost interest in the empty shelter. The tunnels were dark and cramped, barely wide enough for Daniel to move through without scraping his shoulders against the walls. He could not imagine how difficult they must be with her greater height and 4 arms. But she made no complaint, simply following him through the darkness toward whatever waited at the end. They had a long way to go, and Daniel knew that the hardest part was still ahead. But for the first time since the attack began, he felt something that might have been hope. He was not alone anymore, and somehow, against all expectations, neither was she. The maintenance tunnel stretched endlessly through the bones of the station. Daniel moved forward with his flashlight, cutting a narrow path through the darkness while followed close behind. The sounds of the station dying echoed through the metal walls, distant screams and explosions that grew fainter as they traveled deeper into the tunnels. They found her at the third junction, curled into a ball in a narrow side passage with her hands pressed over her ears. She was young, barely 20 years old, wearing the uniform of a communications specialist. Her name tag read, and she flinched away from the light like a frightened animal. Daniel knelt beside her and spoke softly. "Hey, it is okay. We are not going to hurt you." The young woman looked up with wide, terrified eyes. "Private," her voice cracked on every word. "I got separated from my unit. The creatures, they came through the walls. Everyone else, they did not make it." "You are safe now," Daniel said. He helped her to her feet and noticed that she was shaking badly. "What is your specialty, Private?" "Communications," she whispered. "I was working in the signal monitoring station when it happened." Made a sound of irritation behind them. "She will slow us down," she said. "We cannot afford the delay." Daniel turned to face her. "We are not leaving her behind." "I am not suggesting we kill her. I am simply stating a fact. Our mission requires speed. She is frightened and wounded. She will be a burden." Shrank back its words, but Daniel stepped between them. "On Earth," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we have a saying. No one gets left behind. I do not care if it slows us down. I do not care if it makes our mission harder. She is coming with us, and that is final." Stared at him for a long moment. Then something shifted in her expression, not agreement exactly, but perhaps a grudging acceptance. "Very well," she said, "but if she cannot keep up, you will carry her." They moved on, now 3 instead of 2. Stayed close to Daniel, drawing comfort from his steady presence. She still jumped at every sound, but she did not slow them down as much as had predicted. Fear, it seemed, was a powerful motivator. The tunnels grew colder as they approached the engineering section. Daniel noticed ice forming on the walls around them and knew that the void creatures were near. He signaled for the others to stop and switched off his flashlight. In the darkness, he saw them. Shadows moving through a junction ahead, flowing like water through the narrow passages. There were at least a dozen of them, too many to fight in such a confined space. "We need another way around," whispered. "There is no other way," Daniel replied. "This is the only tunnel that leads to engineering." He thought quickly, searching for any advantage. His eyes fell on his flashlight, and an idea began to form. During their earlier fight, he had noticed how the creatures recoiled from direct light. They did not seem truly harmed by it, but they avoided it when they could. Daniel opened his flashlight and examined its components. He found the power regulator and removed it, then connected the battery directly to the bulb. The modification was crude and dangerous, but it would work for a short time before burning out. "What are you doing?" asked. "Making a weapon," Daniel said. He pointed the modified flashlight at a section of wall and pressed the switch. A beam of intense white light shot out, far brighter than any standard flashlight could produce. The metal wall glowed red where the beam touched it. Watched with interest. "Clever," she admitted. "Your people are remarkably quick to adapt." "We have had a lot of practice," Daniel said. "Being the weakest species in the galaxy teaches you to think on your feet." They moved forward with Daniel leading the way, his makeshift light weapon held ready. The creatures sensed their approach and turned toward them, but when Daniel activated the beam, they scattered with silent screams of pain. The light burned them like fire, leaving wisps of darkness floating in the air where they had been. The group pushed through the junction and into a wider tunnel beyond. Daniel's weapon began to overheat in his hand, the casing growing hot enough to burn his skin, but he held on and kept moving. They had to reach engineering before the light gave out. During a brief rest in a small maintenance bay, turned to Daniel with a question that had clearly been troubling her for some time. "Why do humans fight?" she asked. "I have studied your military history. Your species has been at war with itself for thousands of years. You destroy your own cities. You kill your own children. And yet you continue. I do not understand." Daniel thought about the question before answering. "Humans fight for many reasons," he said slowly. "Some of those reasons are noble, protecting the weak, defending freedom, standing up against evil. Some of those reasons are shameful, greed, fear, hatred. We are not perfect beings. We never claimed to be." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. But the best of us, the ones worth remembering, they fight for one reason above all others. They fight to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is what makes a true soldier. Not the battles you win, not the enemies you defeat, but the people you save. Was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice softer than Daniel had ever heard it. My people were like yours once, she said. Long ago, before the warrior code united us, the Ara fought endless wars among ourselves. We nearly destroyed our entire civilization before we found peace. She looked at Daniel with new eyes. Perhaps our peoples are not so different after all. Who had been listening quietly suddenly spoke up. I found something, she said. Before the attack, I intercepted a fragment of communication from the Void Rift. I did not understand it at the time, but now I think I do. What did it say? Daniel asked. The creatures said, her voice trembling. They are not attacking randomly. They are searching for something or someone. The signal was like a beacon, calling them across dimensions. They came here because they were drawn here. Daniel and exchanged a look of concern. If was right, then simply escaping the station might not be enough. Whatever the creatures were searching for, they would not stop until they found it. But that was a problem for later. Right now, they had to reach engineering and give the survivors a chance to escape. Daniel checked his weapon. The casing was cooling slowly, but he doubted it would survive another prolonged use. They would have to move fast and fight hard. He stood and faced the tunnel ahead. Beyond it, he could see the lights of the engineering section, still functioning despite the chaos that had consumed the rest of the station. But between them and their goal, blocking the final stretch of tunnel, something massive waited in the darkness. It was a void creature unlike any they had seen before, a towering shape that filled the entire passage, radiating cold so intense that frost spread across the walls around it. Daniel raised his weapon, but he knew it would not be enough. The creature turned toward them, and the darkness came alive. The massive creature filled the tunnel like a living nightmare. It was not simply larger than the other void creatures. It was different in a way that Daniel could feel in his bones. Where the smaller creatures seemed hungry and mindless, this one radiated intelligence and terrible purpose. Its form shifted constantly, shadows folding into shadows, and at its center burned a cold light that hurt to look at directly. Harvester breathed. The word came out like a prayer for the dying. In our oldest stories, they speak of these beings. They consume the life force of thinking creatures. Each soul they take makes them stronger. Daniel looked past the creature and saw what remained of several station personnel scattered across the engineering floor. They lay where they had fallen, their bodies whole but somehow empty, drained of everything that had made them alive. The harvester had been feeding, and it was not yet satisfied. Made a small sound of horror behind them. Daniel reached back and squeezed her shoulder, trying to offer comfort he did not feel. We have to get past it, he said. Engineering is right there. If we can reach the reactor controls, we can still save the others. The harvester turned toward the sound of his voice. It had no eyes that Daniel could see, no face at all, but he felt its attention settle on him like a physical weight. The cold intensified, and his breath came out in thick white clouds. Daniel activated his modified flashlight and aimed it at the creature. The beam struck its surface and scattered into 1,000 fragments of light, illuminating the tunnel walls but doing no visible harm. The harvester was too powerful, too dense with stolen life force to be affected by such a simple weapon. Stepped forward, placing herself between Daniel and the creature. Go, she said. I will hold it as long as I can. Complete the mission. No, Daniel said. We do this together or not at all. The harvester moved before either of them could react. One moment it was at the far end of the tunnel, and the next it was upon them, shadow limbs reaching out to grasp and consume. Daniel dove to the side, but he was not fast enough. A tendril of darkness caught his leg and sent him spinning into the wall. Pain exploded through his body. He felt ribs crack against the metal surface, felt blood begin to flow from a dozen small wounds. The cold seeped into him through the creature's touch, numbing his leg from the knee down. He tried to stand and fell. Attacked with all four arms, her broken console piece slashing through the harvester's form again and again. Each strike tore away wisps of darkness, but the creature barely seemed to notice. It was focused on Daniel now, drawn to something inside him that it wanted to consume. The harvester loomed over Daniel, and he saw his death in its formless depths. He thought of Earth, of the green fields he would never see again. He thought of all the things he had never done, all the words he had never said. He closed his eyes and waited for the end. It did not come. Stood over him, all four arms raised in defiance. She had placed herself between Daniel and the harvester, shielding him with her own body. The creature's tendrils wrapped around her, and Daniel heard her scream in pain as the cold began to drain her life away. "No," Daniel shouted. He grabbed his arm and pulled with all his remaining strength. The movement tore her free from the harvester's grip, but it cost her. She collapsed beside him, her blue skin pale and her eyes unfocused. "Why?" Daniel demanded. "Why did you do that?" Looked at him, and despite the pain, she smiled. It was the first time he had seen her smile. "I was simply protecting myself," she whispered. "You happened to be nearby." It was the same excuse she had given after saving him the first time, and Daniel knew it was just as false now as it had been then. She had chosen to save him. She had risked her life for a human she had once despised. Screamed a warning, and Daniel looked up to see the harvester gathering itself for another attack. He pulled into a small alcove in the tunnel wall, pressing them both into the narrow space. The creature's tendrils swept past them, missing by inches. The communication unit on its belt crackled to life. She had restored partial communications during their journey through the tunnels, and now Captain Vance's voice came through, desperate and strained. "Evacuation ships are ready, but we cannot approach while the rift remains open. The void creatures are too thick around the hangar. We need a solution now, or everyone dies." Daniel looked at lying in his arms. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. She had given everything to protect him, and now she might die because of it. "I was afraid," Daniel said quietly. His words were meant only for her, though he knew she might not hear them. "I was afraid to die alone out here, far from anyone who cared." He paused, fighting to keep his voice steady. "I do not want to lose you. Not now. Not after everything we have been through." His eyes opened slowly. She looked up at Daniel with an expression he had never seen before, something soft and vulnerable beneath the warrior's pride. "I have spent my entire life being afraid of showing weakness," she said. "I thought it would destroy me, but you showed me that fear is not weakness. What matters is what you do despite the fear." Daniel helped her sit up, supporting her weight against his injured side. They looked at the harvester together, watching it search for them in the darkness. Crawled over to them, her face pale but determined. "I think I understand now," she said. "The void creatures are drawn to a specific frequency. It is the signal produced by conscious minds, the electrical patterns of thinking brains. The station's population was like a beacon calling them across dimensions." Daniel's mind raced through the implications. If the creatures were drawn to thought itself, then no amount of fighting would drive them away. But if they could mask that signal somehow, block the beacon that was drawing the void creatures through the rift, they might be able to stop the attack entirely. "The communication array," he said. "Can we modify it to broadcast a null signal, something that would cancel out the frequency that draws them?" Nodded slowly. "It might work. If we can reach the communication hub and reconfigure the array, we could mask all the life signs on the station. Without the beacon, the rift might even close on its own." The communication hub was past the harvester, at the far end of the engineering section. Getting there meant fighting through the most powerful creature they had faced. Daniel looked at together. She rose to her feet, swaying slightly but standing tall. Together. They moved out of the alcove as one. The harvester sensed them immediately and turned its terrible attention toward them. But this time they were ready. Daniel and separated, attacking from two directions at once. Ran between them, staying low, heading for the communication hub at the far end of the room. The harvester could not focus on all three of them at the same time. Daniel's flashlight weapon had one last burst of power in it. He aimed it at the harvester's center and pressed the switch. The beam flared bright and hot, and for just a moment the creature recoiled. It was not enough to destroy it, but it was enough to create an opening. Reached the communication hub and began working at the controls. She was fast, her fingers flying across the console as she reconfigured the array's settings. Just a little longer, she called out. Daniel and fought to give her that time, each taking wounds that would have killed them alone but somehow finding the strength to continue. They fought not as enemies, not even as allies, but as something more. Two warriors from different worlds, standing together against the darkness. The communication array hummed to life, and a new signal began to broadcast across the station. The harvester screamed. The null signal spread through the station like a wave of silence. Watched her console as the readings changed. The beacon frequency that had drawn the void creatures across dimensions slowly being canceled out by the counter-signal she had created. Throughout the station, the smaller void creatures began to retreat. They pulled back from corridors and rooms, flowing toward the rift like water draining through a hole. The survivors who had been fighting for their lives suddenly found themselves standing alone, their enemies vanishing before their eyes. But the harvester did not retreat. It was too powerful now, too full of stolen life to be affected by the loss of the beacon. It had consumed enough souls to anchor itself in this dimension, and it had no intention of leaving without claiming more. Daniel and faced the creature together, both of them wounded and exhausted but refusing to fall. The harvester towered over them, its form expanding to fill the entire engineering section. The cold it radiated was beyond anything natural, a chill that seemed to freeze thought itself. Captain Vance's voice came through the communication system. The evacuation route is clear. All survivors move to the hangar immediately. I repeat, the hangar is clear. You should go, Daniel said to. Get to the ships, we will hold it here. Shook her head, I am not leaving you. Before Daniel could argue, the main door to engineering burst open. Captain Vance led a small group of survivors into the room, both humans and Aura who had fought their way through the station together. Among them were three Aran warriors, their blue skin marked with wounds but their eyes still fierce with fighting spirit. Straightened at the sight of her people, she called out to them in her own language, her voice carrying the authority of a warrior caste officer. The Aran warriors moved to form up beside her, their weapons ready. One of them hesitated, looking at Daniel with barely concealed contempt. You expect us to follow a human strategy, he demanded. Stepped forward and met his eyes. This human has proven himself a true warrior, she said. Her voice rang through the room, clear and strong despite her wounds. He has fought beside me against impossible odds. He has saved my life and risked his own for those he did not know. Any warrior of Aura would be honored to stand beside him. The warrior looked at Daniel again, this time with something closer to respect. He nodded slowly and took his position. Captain Vance moved to stand beside Daniel. What is the plan, Sergeant? Daniel looked at the harvester, studying its movements. The creature was powerful, but it was also cautious now. It had felt pain for the first time when the null signal activated, and it was uncertain about these beings who continued to fight against it. We need to destroy its core, Daniel said. That cold light at its center, that is where its power comes from. If we can hit it hard enough, we might be able to disperse it permanently. Reached for something at her belt. She drew out a blade that Daniel had not seen before, a ceremonial weapon with a curved edge that seemed to glow faintly in the darkness. This was my grandmother's blade, she said. It has been in my family for 12 generations. The metal was forged from a fallen star. She held the blade up, and Daniel saw that the harvester recoiled slightly from its light. Whatever strange metal the blade was made from, it was something the void creature feared. Daniel understood what needed to happen. I will draw its attention, he said. Get it to focus on me. When it commits to an attack, you strike at the core. Nodded, do not die, Daniel Cole. I have not yet decided if we are friends. Despite everything, Daniel smiled. Do not miss, Ran. He moved forward, shouting at the harvester, waving his arms to draw its attention. The creature turned toward him, sensing the life force it craved. It reached out with tendrils of darkness, and Daniel dodged between them, always staying just out of reach. The other survivors spread out around the room, attacking the harvester from all sides. Their weapons could not truly harm it, but they kept it distracted, kept it from focusing entirely on Daniel. Humans and Aura fought together, their differences forgotten in the face of the greater threat. Daniel felt his strength fading. His wounds were catching up with him, and each movement sent fresh waves of pain through his body. But he kept moving, kept fighting, because he knew that was waiting for her moment. The harvester grew frustrated with its elusive prey. It gathered its power and launched a massive attack, all its tendrils converging on Daniel at once. There was no way to dodge, no way to escape. Daniel planted his feet and faced the darkness head-on. Strug. She moved faster than Daniel's eyes could follow, all four arms driving the ancient blade deep into the harvester's core. The cold light at the creature's center flared bright, and the blade began to glow with an intensity that filled the entire room. The harvester screamed again, but this time the sound carried pain and fear rather than hunger. The ancient metal was doing something to it, disrupting the energy that held its form together. Cracks of light appeared across its surface, spreading outward from where the blade had pierced its core. Held on, pushing the blade deeper despite the cold that was freezing her hands, despite the pain that must have been unbearable. She was not fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone on the station, for everyone the creature might consume if it was not stopped. The harvester exploded into fragments of shadow and light. The force of its destruction threw back, and Daniel caught her before she could hit the ground. They fell together, holding each other as the darkness dissolved around them. The rift in space began to close. Without the harvester to anchor it, without the beacon to draw more creatures through, the tier in dimensions sealed itself. The terrible light faded from the stars, and for the first time in hours, the station was quiet. Daniel and lay on the floor of the engineering section, both too exhausted to move. Around them, the survivors began to cheer, humans and Aura embracing each other in relief and joy. Knelt beside them, tears streaming down her face. You did it, she said. You actually did it. The evacuation proceeded smoothly. The rescue ships docked at the station's hangar, and the survivors filed aboard in orderly lines. Daniel and were carried on stretchers, their wounds too severe for them to walk. Hours later, Daniel stood at the observation window of the rescue vessel. His injuries had been treated, though he would carry scars from this day for the rest of his life. He watched the ruins of Outpost 7 drift in the distance, a broken monument to the battle they had fought. Came to stand beside him. She moved carefully, still recovering from her own wounds, but there was strength in her posture that had not been there before. I have spoken with my commanders, she said. They have heard what happened here, how humans and Aura fought together against the void. She paused, and when she continued, her voice carried formal weight. By the authority of my position, I declare you, Daniel Cole, a friend of the Aaron people. You are the first human to receive this honor. Daniel turned to look at her. Does this mean we are friends? Considered the question for a long moment. I do not know what that word means between our peoples, she said. Our cultures are different. Our histories are different. We have been enemies for longer than we have been allies. She met his eyes, and the coldness that had once been there was gone completely. But I am willing to find out. News of the spread quickly across both human and Aran space. The battle at Outpost 7 became a symbol of what the two species could accomplish when they worked together. Daniel and were asked to serve as advisors for a new joint defense initiative, preparing for the possibility that the Void creatures might return. Was promoted and assigned to lead a research team studying the Void phenomenon. She sent a message to Daniel on his first day at the new posting, thanking him for saving her life and promising to find answers about where the creatures came from and why. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and slow progress, building trust between two peoples who had spent decades viewing each other as threats was not easy. There were setbacks and arguments, moments when old prejudices threatened to destroy everything they had built. But Daniel and faced each challenge together, just as they had faced the Harvester. They trained side by side, learning each other's fighting styles and combining them into something new. Human adaptability met Aran discipline, and from that meeting came techniques that neither species could have developed alone. On the day their new unit was officially formed, Daniel and stood together before a crowd of humans and Aura. They did not give speeches or make grand promises. They simply stood side by side, a soldier of Earth and a warrior of Aura, united by everything they had survived. Neither of them knew what the future would bring. The Void was still out there, somewhere beyond the boundaries of normal space. Other threats would come, as they always did. The universe was vast and dangerous, and no alliance could protect against every danger. But as Daniel looked at and saw her looking back at him, he knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was enough.